the Boy Scout project, a couple about homework and homework policy, and 134 on school start times. Expressing a variety of opinions.
Okay. Now you're, okay. We do have a presentation. I'll just put the mouse on. So good evening. I'm very pleased to be able to present to you this evening the recommendation for school start times in the Ridgefield Public Schools. The purpose of this presentation is to outline the actual start time recommendation, to provide an overview of the factors that we've taken into consideration in development of this recommendation, and then also to frame project management and implementation moving forward. As you know, all of our work in the Ridgefield Public Schools is deeply focused on our mission and our vision of the graduate. So our mission is very clear in providing engaging, relevant, and personalized learning experience so that all kids can be successful in life, learning, and work as global citizens. Connected to this, I think more importantly, is perhaps the core values that drive that mission. And so those core values are deeply connected to the community, building an inclusive climate of trust, safety, and respect in partnership with our staff, our families, the larger community, and our students. And one of the core values that's driving this change in school start times is the notion of that children, for academic achievement and learning, they need student emotional and physical wellness. And so promoting wellness of body and mind is a core value that this board and the community values, and it's embodied in this mission. And so we want to stay focused on our core values as we drive all of our work moving forward. As you know, since January 2016, the board has really refreshed and taken a closer examination on the research related to adolescent sleep and school start times. And certainly, we can sit here today much more informed and confident that there is absolutely a connection between student learning and physical and emotional wellness, that there is no doubt that there are different circadian rhythms and biological sleep patterns for adolescents that move kids on their sleep patterns towards 11 o'clock or later. They run in a different year, and they're not able to fall asleep. And certainly, over time, this lack of sleep, lack of rest, has effects on health and safety, has behavioral effects, has cognitive effects. So there's loss of focus, there's decreased energy, mental fatigue, decreased achievement is certainly possible as an accumulation of all of those cognitive effects. Behavioral effects, increased anger, irritability, anxiety, depression, all of this well documented in the research. The board has seen this research, has responded to it. Certainly the health and safety effects related to adolescent sleep in terms of driving ability. We know that students who are more rested have fewer accidents when they're behind the wheel. Children who are sleep deprived are more apt to be sick, have more bouts of illness, and certainly they're less likely to have the energy to engage in a more healthy lifestyle. So we want to remind ourselves of some of the key points that Dr. Kanan presented to the district steering committee, as well as to the larger parent population in September, and recognize that the science is clear around the benefits of having children sleep longer, and the benefits of recognizing that 8:30 is a scientifically proven point for us to try and land for adolescent sleep. As you know, the board in May charged a district steering committee to begin the examination of exploring a delayed school start time. And so the district steering committee had representative members from all across the community, teachers, leaders, board members, board of finance members, parents, 2 students, and explored multiple scenarios to try and come up with options that may be able to proceed forward to the board and to a survey. So there were 3 different scenario types. We looked at 8 originally and then modified some of those 8. So in total, we looked at about 12 different scenarios. Scenarios were categorized as type 1, type 2, or type 3. The type 3 did result in a 3-tiered system. The type 2 were just keeping a 4-tier system, but changing the groupings of schools. So right now we have our late schools, the 4 tiers, and the Barlow Mountain, Veterans Park, and Farmingville. So the type 2 switched those patterns up. The type 1 kept all the tiers together, just changed the timing of them. And so ultimately, the committee explored all of these options and advanced 3 options, as well as status quo, to the community to really gauge understanding around a changed approach. The survey was not a vote. And the board was very clear in May and then again in June when determining survey development that the status quo option needed to remain. The board demonstrated a commitment to that, spoke about that at several different meetings. So in the survey, we asked parents, staff members, and students to respond to this approach number 1 is how it was listed in the survey. It's 1C for those who saw the scenarios through committee. And as you can see, it hit a target start time for the high school of 8:30, and then kept our 4-tier system, just shifted the time of those tiers back, and moved the middle school up a tiny bit to 7:55. It's anticipated that this approach would save approximately $90,000 in transportation costs over implementation time. We also advanced approach number 2 and put this in the survey. This is an anticipated savings of $180,000 or approximately 2 buses. And again, you can see that the target time for Ridgefield High School was 8:35 with an end time of 3:25. It moved the middle school back to 9:10 and then put changed our tiers as they currently exist. So the configuration of schools on tier 1 and tier 2 are different than our current elementary configuration. And the elementaries would start at 8 or 8:05 or 7:35 if it were the first tier. And so this went out as a survey option as well. The third survey was approach 1D, the third option, which was what the committee believed met all parameters, which is what we heard from stakeholders throughout the feedback process, which was try and have all schools start between 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. And so this achieved that, but you can see that the impact was 17 vehicles or a cost of a little bit more than $1.5 million. So the feedback loop has been in place since the board really began advancing this work. The strategic planning committee of the board has guided this process right up to the formulation of the steering committee in June. The strategic planning committee held focus group sessions in March and April with students, with parents, and with teachers. Certainly we've had feedback from the community throughout this process in Board of Education meetings, specifically public comments. We've received a great deal of email communication throughout and have been responsive to that communication. Dr. Kanan made a presentation in September, which was fairly well attended by parents, and opportunities for parents to raise questions and concerns related to the science and the potential change. And then we held a special Board of Education meeting specific to go over the results and information shared in the school start time survey analysis, and that was just last week. So lots of opportunity for feedback along the way. And so the survey was to measure interest in these different approaches, the 3 scenarios that were moved forward. It certainly was not a vote, and we worked hard, I think, to communicate that throughout the survey window. We used 2 different approaches, 2 different avenues of entry for the parent survey. There was an open survey monkey distributed where over 3,092 parents responded. And then the district provided a URL to our parent-provided email addresses with over 2,775 responses. It's important to note that the differences between the open and closed survey were statistically insignificant in terms of that information that was shared. Our staff survey, we had 564 completed staff surveys. That's about 78% of our certified and non-certified staff completed that survey, so that's a very good response rate. Our student surveys, we surveyed children in grades 8 through 12. We had 1,510 completed surveys, which is 73% of our students grades 8 through 12. And the greater variance was at the high school. High school students took the survey during science class, but not all students ended up being able to participate in it. We had a stronger percentage at the two middle schools. So my recommendation to the board moving forward is that the Ridgefield Public School change school start times to align with the research on adolescent health and sleep for the 2019-2020 school year. That we use approach number 1 as the basis for implementation, and that we ask school bus consultants to further review and refine and evaluate that approach. That approach doesn't quite meet all the parameters that we've heard along the way. We know that the fourth tier that exists today at the elementary level is not well supported by parents. You know that there's a lot of feedback around that time frame, and so as we look at our elementary schools starting at 9:15, we'd like school bus consultants to continue to work on refining some of these options and use this approach number 1 as the basis for this. And so what leads me to this recommendation? There are key data points in the survey, but there's also significant work underway in the system right now that aligns to our mission and vision of the graduate. And this work of changing school start times fits into that work and will be timely in 2019 and 20. So one of the key data points is that the only bell time change option that parents, staff, and students universally thought was a positive possibility was the status quo. There was lots of open-ended feedback on both surveys, consistent around disruptions to family routines, the timeline for change, and the fourth tier elementary transportation, all identified as barriers. And they're significant challenges that I think the board and the leadership team, we need to work to help overcome and ameliorate and attempt to engage the parents in this change process over time. My emphasis would be, I think we need to prioritize collaboration in this process, collaboration with, like being at home. Right? Just gotta tune all that out. Prioritize collaboration in process over pace. I think that that's critically important at this juncture in time. That it's clear that we have an opportunity in front of us to do what's right for kids, to further advance our mission and vision of the graduate, to really elevate our work in teaching and learning, and that we need to do it in collaboration with parents, staff, and students. We're not at that moment right now, but I think as we finish this meeting tonight, that's where we need to move forward, is to say that we're going to do this in concert together and learn from one another and implement in 2019-20. The other factor that informs this recommendation is that we are engaged with Stanford University in Challenge Success with 9 key sort of factors being examined to help us drive our mission and vision of the graduate and drive our work across the district. Some of those key factors that this survey, Challenge Success, will examine is sleep, as reported by students, homework, stress, physical symptoms related to stress. It'll talk about academic integrity, academic expectations, parental expectations for student mastery of work. So all of that, taken in concert with this change for school start time, will really help to leverage the district's policy framework, the district's implementation of change. We'll have more information, not just a change in school start times. It will be much more holistic to improve social, emotional, physical, and even academic performance for our children. Certainly, we need to continue to consider project management. In order to do that work, we are going to look at a commitment of district resources. We have to manage this ourselves. It will be a reallocation of human resources within the district that we're still looking at. We'll need to revise workloads, develop workflows and deliverables, and think about what data do we want to collect as we implement the change in school start times to be able to measure our successful implementation of this change. Certainly there are many unknowns as we sit here today. Some of those are the most recent position statement from FCAC, which certainly doesn't help support these shifts for member schools. We need to continue to work locally with police and other municipal departments to take a look at local traffic impact. Certainly the state and local budget impacts are unknowns. And we need to continue to vet our data on ridership and see what the impact is on bus fleet needs, so that you know we have shared our first round of ridership data with school bus consultants. And so they have that information. They also have our 2017-18 data and are vetting the scenarios against that data. And Mike Archer from School Bus Consultants is here tonight and could, if there were questions, could speak to that. So as we think about successful implementation, this comes from educational and organizational research, but I think we want successful implementation because this is a big change and we want to be able to sustain this change. And so you can see that there are really 5 key factors that lead to successful implementation. Their vision, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan. And so you can see what happens when any element of that successful implementation is missing. And so I think we have very clearly the vision for this work. I think our challenge is the incentives based on the feedback that came throughout the surveys, throughout focus groups, through email. The incentives, in terms of how do all parents perceive this change, how do students perceive this change, how do staff perceive this change, and I think we have an opportunity to help frame through learning and engagement with parents and staff to sort of frame what those incentives could be. We also need to look very carefully at our resources, because you can see what happens without incentives, you get resistance. Without resources, you get frustration. And then without a clear action plan, you get false starts. And so we need to put all of this in place and vet it and defend it and be accountable to it so that we have sustainable change moving forward. So I firmly believe that this places the priority on our entire educational system and serves the health and well-being and developmental and academic needs of all of our students well. It's the foundation of this recommendation is to move forward and to maintain a commitment to reason, science, and students, while recognizing that staff and parents need more time to think, plan, and work on transition. And that's all part of this work moving forward. This does prioritize the health and well-being of our students and will drive systemic work in policy development, communication, stakeholder education, and resource deployment. And the science is sound. We've heard from parents that they have legitimate concerns, and the board needs more time to work with the plan to ease some of these concerns. That's my recommendation to the board. I'm confident in this recommendation, and I'm confident in our ability to implement successfully for 2019-20.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Baldwin, for on for that presentation. Jim, I think you were the chair of the strategic planning committee and were have been involved in this. Is there anything that you'd like to start off the discussion with?
Absolutely. So as Dr. Baldwin said, we've been looking at this for probably the better part of the year. And during that time, a lot of time and thought and energy has gone into this process. And, the contributions were numerous. And even though I think, we still have work ahead of us, I'd like to acknowledge some of the people, or many of the people that, took a part in this, because I think, a lot of hard work was done here. I mean, Dr. Baldwin and her staff spent plenty of time working on this, countless hours. And I think that, really should be acknowledged. And Fran and Dave and Margaret on the steering committee spent a lot of time. Everybody on the steering committee spent a lot of time. Even during the summer, we spent hours and hours working on it. Doug wasn't on the steering committee, but as a member of the strategic planning committee, he always had good insight and was always happy to make us aware of his thoughts, as usual. So I appreciate that. Everybody who participated in the focus groups brought a lot of insight to what we did. The surveys, people that spoke at the meetings here, and the numerous emails that we've received, especially this week. I mean, everything we get, we consider, we read, we talk about, we contemplate. It doesn't go unnoticed. So we appreciate that. And the consultants too. I think the consultants have done a great job in having us focus on the issues that we need to focus on. But, I believe that the issues, as we've peeled it back, this is like peeling an onion. The more we've peeled it back, the more we've seen there was more work to be done and more issues to be looked at. And with the people who have been contributing by their comments and their thoughts and emails have given us an indication of where we have to go next. I think it's been very important. So I think we realize, as Dr. Baldwin has said many times, there's a lot of moving parts to this and a lot of things that need to be considered. And I'm sure all of us, we may disagree on where we stand on either side or even in the middle of everything, but it's not a simple issue. And so, that's really all I have to say. And, we can start our discussion, but I appreciate everybody's input that they have put into this, because there have been countless hours that have been put into this issue.
Dave and Margaret, you were on the steering committee. I wondered if you wanted an opportunity to say anything or to add to the discussion at this moment.
Yeah, sure. So I appreciate that recap, Dr. Baldwin. It was fantastic. Throughout this whole time, I struggled to keep up with all the data points, all the emails, and trying to maintain an open mind with everything. Because I'd read some emails and I'd feel myself getting swayed, and then 2 minutes later, another email would come in, and there's another great point. So it was a bit of a challenge. I'm glad we're moving to changing the start times, and certainly the feedback and the impact from everyone's commitment has been great. But I do have some comments about what you presented, and I can discuss some of these start times in a little bit more detail here in the next few minutes.
Margaret, because you were on the steering committee and you went down to Washington as the representative of the board to listen at the start school later, start school. I can't remember what the title of the course.
It all blends together.
I don't know.
I would, and I actually wrote it out because I believe this is too important for me to, after the meeting, all of a sudden go, oh gosh, I wish I'd said that. So please bear with me, I'm going to read a prepared statement, and it's actually a little bit longer than theirs. So bear with me, because this is my time in the life. This is a tough one. The subject is deeply personal, impacting not just the classroom, but also our homes and established routines. No matter what we say tonight, there will be those who say we got it right, and those who insist we got it wrong. But tonight we're being leaders who are doing what we think is right for our students and district based on our mission, the information we have, and the reality of where we are. First, I want to thank the parents, staff, student, and community who have joined us in this process. You've been honest, passionate, and willing to speak up, and that's part of what makes Ridgefield so special. We've listened to your comments in the spring forums, your hundreds of emails, all the public and not so public comments, over 700 individual survey comments, letters to the press, and your social media posts. Thank you also to the administration, staff, and consultants who have helped to provide us information that is needed to understand the very real impacts of change and what we need to address. Also to the steering committee for their time, careful consideration, and input in the change options. And thank you to the other districts, the administrations, their boards of eds, and parents who have considered and or made a change, and their willingness to speak with individual Board of Ed members and administration as part of our due diligence in this process. Lastly, thank you to my fellow board members who have dedicated so much time and careful thought to this discussion. I speak confidently when I say that we have all met our ethical obligation to put children first in every step of this process and put great weight on our fiduciary duty to protect our student health through a number of initiatives of which start time is just a part. I believe we should change the high school start time. As for when is the best timeline to set the change up for success, my approach is a simple adapted cost-benefit approach. The benefits we've heard, and they're tied to the mission statement, specifically wellness of body and mind, and all of the health benefits that are associated with better, more quality sleep aligned to adolescent biology. The costs themselves are more than just tangible dollars in transportation, although those are obviously very important. It's also the cost to deploy resources of time and people to this huge undertaking. The redeployment is not just for the planning phase, but also execution and adapting. In 2 of our neighboring districts, we're witnessing firsthand the time and energy needed to address unanticipated consequences after rollout. We have to understand the costs of what we are giving up. What can we not do if we refocus time, energy, and personnel towards the rollout of change times for next fall? There are also other intangible costs and risk factors, like adjusting established routines and loss of community, staff, and family goodwill. We also need to factor in a margin for unanticipated costs, such as Greenwich has found with having to add buses. Quite simply, we need more time to bring that ratio to a more acceptable level, to maximize the benefits and minimize the costs. The extra time is not to kick the can down the road, but rather to keep it on the road. The costs are not fixed nor overcomable, and our challenges are not unique, but we need to use the extra year to minimize them. The additional time for implementation planning must be used to its maximum potential. Our own analysis, lessons learned from our neighboring districts, and your feedback has shown us that we must further explore things like the 4th tier. We haven't nailed it with the current scenarios, and we need to do more creative thinking around the elementary population. Transportation we need to explore. We need to get a better understanding of where we actually are currently and explore and then fine-tune policy and creative transportation options such as efficient routing, bus length, both idle time and on the bus, potentially collapsing a tier, and true costs. There are other transportation considerations, including potential traffic impact and anticipated ridership changes. We need to explore strategies to help families with childcare implications. We have to continue efforts to communicate and educate stakeholders on the benefits of a change and how that benefits us all. We have to allow the community programs time to adapt and our school extracurricular and athletic offerings time to creatively think about solutions. And we need to further explore other creative opportunities that haven't been fully discussed, adjusting light at the school, length of day, way to minimize pullouts at end of day for extracurricular and athletic activities, and transportation policies, just to name a few. Don't forget, as Dr. Baldwin said, this conversation is just a part of our continued commitment to addressing our student health, both physical and emotional, in a holistic way. We're currently discussing other items that have a positive impact on our students this year and next year, such as the homework policy, professional development for our staff around emotional intelligence and anxiety, ideas that will arise from Challenge Success Survey, and an understanding of what our students are really experiencing and how best to help them improve social, emotional, and physical well-being. We're looking at changes in the graduation and credit requirements. We're also looking to continue our education efforts to stakeholders about sleep science and sleep hygiene and other ways to improve sleep and overall health, such as limiting social media and screen time, focusing techniques, and other ideas. I've heard some say that to delay will cause more divisiveness. I ask why. That's a choice. We choose how to move forward. I choose to see this as an opportunity to come together in partnership toward a successful rollout, to look forward to a change in our community that will be in the best interest of our children. I believe we're role modeling for our kids, problem solving, critical thinking, collaboration amongst those with differing views, respectful discourse, and courage to understand our limitations. I want this change to work because it is best for adolescents based on the science. And I want to set the change up for success, not force a situation that could doom a good thing to failure. For that reason, I'm in support of the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. I'm not sure anybody's going to want to go after you.
That's all I had to write down.
But I appreciate that. That was heartfelt and it covered a lot of the points that people have made in their emails and the concerns that we all have. Would you like to say something? We're also on strategic planning.
Yeah, so I wrote it down too, because I figured I would bumble my words, and I want to echo Jim's thank yous and Margaret's thank yous, and I won't waste a lot of time by going through them again, except to say, I read a lot of email. So I too am supporting the superintendent's recommendation to implement new school start times in the 2019-2020 school year. Here's why. Our first attempt at designing a model for healthier start times with the parameters given did not produce a scenario that I can unequivocally support, and I don't believe a new one can be found in a timeline that gives me confidence of its successful implementation. I want to see a balanced improvement in start times for all Ridgefield students, and the focus is on improving the health and wellness of all of our children through a dramatic change like this one. I believe we have to get it right. Here are 5 areas where I think we are on the right track and need to move forward, and I expect that these will have been completed by June 2018. Number 1, an updated and more reliable busing analysis based on the 2017-2018 usage and new bus contracts. Number 2, a revised district homework policy that supports the revised start time so that it looks forward. And 3, a revised graduation requirement policy that allows for more choice and freedom in high school planning. Number 4, an impact study on athletics completed and presented to the community. Number 5, a communication plan that focuses on healthy start times that engages the community in an active dialogue on the implementation of start times in 2019-2020. I remain convinced revising school start time should be a district priority, and to ensure its success, we need to clarify the key elements of the discussion. In my opinion, these elements must be expanded to include: 1, rectifying the discrepancy of student start time experience among our elementary schools. Number 2, making transparent the budgetary impact of this change that will affect other parts of our system. I believe this must be an actual versus a projected. Next, make a more determined, consistent, and wide-reaching effort to educate our community that the impact of changing the start times will produce results we are proud of. This cannot be a one-and-done approach. Next, give teachers ample time to reconsider and revise curriculum decisions and impact as they shift their instruction and assessment practices. I think that's a critical piece. If we do not recognize that teachers need time to adjust to this change as well, we are doing them a disservice to the quality work they are currently doing. And finally, and maybe most important, I think a determined and committed effort by our athletic director to be a force in the FCIC to change their position. If this is not able to be accomplished, we need an alternate plan developed with other late starting schools to address the issue. I would put no ends on the range of options. I expect this work would begin immediately and request a progress update by the end of January 2018. If we are going to change the FCIC, we are going to be a force for this good. It takes time and we need to get underway. I support revamping the school start times in our district to improve the health and wellness of our children. We have suffered the effects of the 2011 budget cut that brought us this 4-tier system for the last 6 years. But we also need to learn the lesson those cuts taught us. This change is too important to get wrong, and the effects too hard to undo if we don't get it right. Thank you for being patient with me.
Thank you. I don't know if anybody else wants to make a statement or if we want to move into discussion. I'm going to take all and any comments here.
Things written, but
Oh, go for it.
no, not like that. I'm ready just to move into discussion already, and I can start that discussion because it is a discussion, and I have to say that I walked in tonight with not having listened to everybody yet. We haven't been having these discussions outside of the table. Not necessarily supporting the superintendent's recommendation for approach 1, but understanding why she chose it. I don't support it because it doesn't employ the all means all that we've heard for the past 2 years. Option 1 has middle school students going to school before the medical recommendations, and it has elementary school students ages 4 through 11 going to school very late in the day. And as we heard from Dr. Kanan, there's clear research that shows that children's engagement really does decrease after that 2-2:30 timeframe. I understand why you chose it. I see the survey results. I see that that is where our community values past the status quo, and we heard very loud and clear that childcare, if we were to slide elementary school earlier in the day, would be a significant impact on this community. So I understand that, but my concern with supporting it is I don't know that it really follows the medical research. It certainly helps the high school students, absolutely. But we still have elementary and middle school that aren't being addressed. So it's a discussion point to start to talk about, not a set in stone, but those are my concerns.
And this scenario didn't fully meet the parameters, I think, that were drawn up by the steering committee.
Well, the steering committee had a parameter where they did want all elementary schools to start between 8 and 9. So it does not fully meet that parameter.
And I think the steering committee also had, please correct me if I'm wrong, but also had a parameter in there that a 10 to 20 minute either dropping off earlier or picking up later could be built in.
Correct.
Which for one student it could be nothing, another student it could be 10 minutes, but it could be up to 40 minutes for another student if you're the 20 minutes on in the morning and the 20 minutes on the end. And that's not acceptable, especially for a dismissal time at 4 o'clock or later.
I think we heard that as well in email and comments. The elementary late schools really feel that they are being punished. That's perhaps not quite the correct word, but they have the idea that we'd be able to flip it to have, and I think we can't flip it because of the way that the bus routes go. So the idea is, do we try and work on this to see if we go back to something closer to the 3 tiers? I mean, when we tried to look at it in the steering committee originally, I think the cost was too great. But if perhaps the parameter of how much it's going to cost has to be loosened, or we have to be really clear. To go back to a 3-tier system is going to cost this much, but it enables us to meet the parameters.
Can I ask you a question? I know we've taken the contract, the bus contracts out to bid. And what parameters have we given the bus companies?
Bus companies are just bidding on sort of the fleet. They don't need to know the tiered structure. They know that we currently have a 4-tiered structure. There was a pre-bid meeting last Thursday.
So like now if it's $90,000 per bus, they're bidding against that, or?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. And we had 8 vendors come last Thursday to the pre-bid meeting, so that's really quite positive that generated that much interest. The vendors were updated as to where we are in our current process with the RFP, so that they have an understanding of the work, that there's a recommendation with the board, that the board will make a decision on that, hopefully tonight. So they were updated with that information.
I think there was language in that RFP, correct me if I'm wrong, also, that the number of buses, that contract can be amended if these changes, if there was an increase or a decrease in the number of buses.
have to have that language to build flexibility.
It was a good article, it was very flexible, so. But, so, Margaret, you're my idol, that was, it's tough to, as I sat there and listened to you and Doug, Doug, like you clearly articulated some things that we need to accomplish, which, really helps set the framework. So, not to say that you're not my idol too.
Competing items.
Competing idols. I struggle a bit with the elementary school start times at 9:15, 4:05. I'd like to see those if we could pull those in earlier. Having those kids out at 4:05 and home by 5 o'clock, I think is a big challenge. And it always has been with the later elementary schools. So I think that's something that I'd like to see how everyone else feels and maybe just see how that discussion works. And the other thing too is I'm not convinced that we're gonna see those savings of $90,000. You know, when I think about what happened in Reading with the ridership going up, I don't know if we're gonna see the same thing and how that's gonna impact the number of buses. Or when we start talking about implementation, we're gonna have some other costs. So any savings we might have with the current bus contract, where we might see savings with the RFP, might get absorbed in implementation costs. So I like to be careful about what we're saying about the costs associated with executing on this change.
Yeah, I did hear a comment when I was out last week that said, oh, well, your institution school start time changes to save money. And I said, no, I don't think that's why we're doing it. And I don't necessarily think it's achievable and cost neutral if we cannot, this doesn't mean what we wanted to do. And so I think we may have to revise that. Do you want to say something else?
You know, I think that this all makes a lot of sense in terms of committing to it and then giving the year to plan. I think part of it is also giving our community partners, like our local sports and religious organizations and childcare to you know, help us to make it the most successful change that we can make it. So the year, you know, the extra year does give us that planning time.
Sorry, I don't need to go back to you, Susan.
It's okay. I would first of all like to thank Dr. Baldwin, because you've brought resources to this question to help us and support us in this decision-making process that we have not seen in previous iterations when this issue has come before us. So that's been a fantastic help, I think. And I certainly have come to agree with the science and understand the science. I think there is still an educational piece for the community in that. As much as it's been discussed in the paper and whatnot, I think we're still sharing that knowledge with the community. Everybody thinks it's just about an extra hour of sleep as opposed to the circadian rhythm and aligning instruction with when kids are most receptive to receiving instruction. I have to admit, I was initially a little disappointed that we weren't plowing ahead next fall, but I kind of, I certainly understand your reasoning, and I think they're great reasons, and I also flash back to one of the things that Margaret brought back from the conference was the importance of taking the time to get it right. So that's kind of been my few keystone thoughts on this. And I certainly am sensitive to the concerns of the elementary parents, the late times. And I'm not sure how it can all be mushed around. Obviously getting everybody within that magic window is really expensive. So, but maybe some new options will come up as we work with the more recent data as well.
It's hard to follow everyone who's already spoken, because they've said virtually what I'd like to say. Thank you. I agree with Dave too about the transportation. I feel that a lot of work needs to be done on the bus routes, because I'm behind buses that stop every 40 foot at one house and another. I think it could be more efficient. Also, as others have said, I am supporting the late school start times, and that will probably make a difference to how many high school parents drive them to school, as in Greenwich there'll be more kids riding on the bus. We need more time to get everything on our ducks in a row, and I've particularly read every email and listened to the elementary school parents, and I too am not happy with approach number one because of the later elementary school start times and the fact that young minds are more alert earlier in the day. And I I agree, 3 tiers should never have gone to 4 tiers. In a perfect world, wouldn't it be wonderful if they could all start between 8:30 and 9, as they do in Australia and they do in Finland and they do in the UK. But I also think we need to look at, we are looking at the homework policy, which is really important. But I also think for social emotional welfare, we need to look at possibly restricting how many AP classes so that the competitive kids don't feel that they have to take them on. I think that's important too. But I'm talking operationally, and of course not allowed to do that. But I'd just like to put it out there, and also shortening the school day might be something we can look at too. But, I think it would be great to have the extra time to work on all of these things and get community involvement and all of us to be on board together. Thank you for all of your hard work and everybody on the strategic planning committee.
So, I'm sorry, you were going to say, because obviously we need to have a plan.
I just wanted to ask, you might not have maybe the answer to this, but what do you think the resources are? You mentioned in your presentation about the resources, right, and reallocation. So does that mean the current staff as is today, regardless of the staff, that reallocation or bringing in some new staff, what do you think? Have you put any thought into how many people or staff you would need to execute the plan? And also, just to follow up on Tracy's comment about the length of the school day. Is there going to be consideration, is that a realistic question to ask, can the school day be shortened, maybe at the elementary school or the middle school? Is that realistic?
So I'll start with the latter.
Okay.
We can look at the school day. I'm not sure that is going to help with the tiered transportation and bell times. It may actually exacerbate the window. But we can look at it. It's certainly an opportunity, and we've heard through even the focus groups in the spring, questions about the length of the day. And so I think we need to better understand, I think some of those questions came from lags in transportation though, parents being frustrated around how long children were waiting for buses, and that the arrival time was not always on time, especially some of these later start school times. So I think we want to be clear on what the problem is we're trying to solve. And so we can look at elementary times, and we can also look at our transportation system and those scenarios. In terms of resource deployment, I think it's going to take the concerted effort of the cabinet and some different structures that we'll put in place at the central office level around looping into this project. And then in addition to that, looking at least 2 bodies helping to lead this work.
And do you see with that reallocation of resources sacrifices being made to other projects?
It's possible, yes.
2 bodies full-time?
No.
How much?
Taking existing staff
How
and,
much time?
probably a day and a half.
A week?
A day and a half a week of their work has to be focused on this, and there may be more intensity at different times, especially as we lead towards implementation.
And with that staff, the reallocation, what impact would it have on what the staff would do?
Those are the conversations that need to be had.
Okay.
So we can report out on that as part of next level work.
Yeah, I think that's something we need to look at closely, make sure that other areas aren't suffering.
Can we get the public volunteers in? Well, I don't think you want volunteers on this, I think you want accountability. And that's what Tracy, I think, just-
I'm a little concerned about delaying the implementation. But as I'm sitting again, coming into the meeting, listening to Margaret speak and Doug speak and you speak, have helped me to know that that's probably an area that I'm going to have to negotiate a little bit on. I just want to really understand what the barriers are for implementation in 1819. One, we don't have a workable solution. I get that. So we still need to work with school bus consultants on creating a workable solution. Is that something that is going to take months, or is that something that is, I know they dove into the data already, and I don't know if Mike wants to
Well,
go
so,
there tonight, or is there some
I don't
other
think
things
it'd
you
be,
have to talk about?
I don't think it'd be really beneficial
Right.
to go there tonight, because, you know, Mike's hearing tonight, you know, for the first time, that scenario 1C really isn't a scenario that the board wants to advance. And so, they've done a lot of work on scenario development. We will be in touch with school bus consultants to try and help shape another iteration of that. So certainly, not having a scenario that either meets all parameters or is workable is a barrier. You know, other barriers are very clearly based on this scenario. The fourth tier, the tier of a 9:15 start, is a barrier. So after 9 o'clock at the elementary level, that's a barrier. We've received feedback around family routines and disruptions of family routines as barriers. These are not insurmountable, nor are they unusual. They're very typical barriers. You read them in the research. You can identify there's, you know, 8 key barriers, one of which is, you know, family routines, after school activities, extracurricular athletics. All of those barriers exist in Ridgefield at this moment. And they're well documented in the research. And so we need time to educate people better on the science and on the change process. And then we need time to loop our staff into the process, because we are generating some momentum around culture change, around teacher leadership. You saw tonight some great evidence of curriculum change and the impacts that is having for children. We want to make sure that the staff is with us and understanding and helping to advance this work. And at this juncture, similar to the parents, that level of awareness and ownership and readiness is a barrier. And so it's, again, well documented in the research that that's also another very standard one of 8 barriers to implementation is readiness of school staff.
I think Sharon and Margaret, you listened to an article last week for a district that's done it, and I think they took a number of years before they came to a decision to implement it. I can't remember how you
Yeah,
said
my
that.
understanding is the superintendent started about 10 years ago. He came from Edina, which was one of the first districts to actually make the start time 20 years prior. So it was a passion of his as he came, and he started from day one trying to get some momentum going for changing start times in Wayzata. I think that's how you say it. But it took a few years, and they did actually implement it last year, but it wasn't until 3 or 4 years ago, so maybe 6 years into his superintendentship, that he was able to get the momentum to really start to move it forward. So it takes time, even with people where it is a really strong passion, and people who came from a district where they had knowledge of how it actually worked and what those benefits were.
You know, I listed athletics here. I know the high school's going through an accreditation process right now as well, so that's a barrier to freeing up resources and to, you know, staff for helping. Doug, you mentioned curriculum. I'm not sure what you mean by how is curriculum impacted by the change in start times? Help me
Well, I'm going to make
understand
the
that.
assumption that there are 2 other pieces. One, there's a new homework policy, and 2, there's a graduation policy.
Okay.
Right? So if there's a new homework policy, I think teachers, it will have an impact on the way they plan instruction and the way they plan for practice and they plan for other things. If there is a culture shift that can happen around the assessment piece, which we've talked about here, right, then throwing the start time piece into that equation and forcing a new homework model, et cetera, kind of accelerates it at a speed that maybe doesn't produce the results it would have with all the other factors. It was one of the factors, but I do think it's that important that teachers have the ability and time to either get training or whatever, work together, collaborate to say, okay, so these other things are changing. How is this going to affect the rest of what I do? So.
Okay. thank you, that helps me understand a little bit better.
The other barrier that we put up, I think, was traffic, because we haven't really done a traffic study. This is not transportation, it's traffic flow.
It's just really volume at specific times, and I think until we get a more vetted scenario of bell times that works, that's the next level that we have to engage the town and possibly the state in an examination of are there impacts. But right now, scenario 1C is what we would want to look at for impacts. But I'm not sure that's a good use of time or energy because we want to revise that a bit.
So can I ask you a dollars and cents question? With the consultants, are they paid on a flat fee, or have they been paid for what they've done? And if we go back to them with other scenarios, do we have to pay more at that point?
We're not paying more, we get invoiced. We we asked for a scope of the work from school bus consultants. And so they've delivered on that scope of the work, and they have yet to meet the dollar amount in invoicing. So they're about halfway through the total dollar amount. We've received invoices that equal about half of what we budgeted for. At Advance, we've received invoices that equal about 3/4 of what we've budgeted for.
I don't want to miss any questions.
Well, no, I think having a conversation regarding around the table, the scenario that has been put forth, which we all made comments on that, may not, is not the right solution, but it does keep the middle school starting earlier than the recommended time frame from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the CDC, the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine, the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry. I just think we should have a dialogue regarding that. We can't have I don't think we can have the ideal of everybody starting exactly what we want, but I think that that's a conversation piece to have as to if that's really keeping the elementary schools later in the day, or if we're gonna go back and redo scenarios, do we look at sliding those elementary students to earlier in the day? Doing that may allow for a shortening of the day of elementary students, because then they would be the first tier. So if we were to shorten the day of the middle school, it just would trickle down all the way through to buses not being able to get, shorten the day of the elementary school at the current way it's set up. The buses wouldn't be able to get there in time to pick them up because it's the trickle down effect that we're getting in other places. Sliding them to the beginning of the day allows for some flexibility.
But I felt like when we were looking at, well, certainly the emails we've got, that putting the elementary schools at the beginning of the day seems to be really unpopular. Really unpopular.
Right, at 7:30 time, when people seem like have a big barrier there too.
My guess would be that if Dr. Bowman had put forth the scenario though at 7:30, most of us would have been like, no, that's not good either. So is the data skewed because it said 7:35 with kids having to be out 7 o'clock for
So the steering committee looked at scenarios that had the elementary schools earlier, the high school at around 8:25 or 8:30, and sometimes even 8:35, and the middle school starting at 9:10. We looked at scenarios. So we can go back to school bus consultants and take some of the foundation scenarios that they've already developed and identify ones that look close and ask them to continue to vet and refine and get us the information. I think it's dangerous to start from scratch again, because then, you feel like you're changing the message to the community. And I think the board's just going to have to decide around elementary times. And that is why I did not advance 2C. It saved $180,000, but we received significant feedback that it was a huge barrier in the community to have elementary children going first. So we can wrestle with all of that.
I think all communities make some compromises, because in Newtown, I mean, they've gone to an 8 o'clock and a 9 o'clock, and the 8 o'clock is 7 through 12, they've always bust 7 through 12 together, and then they've done 9 o'clock as K through 6, which they hadn't used to bust together, and they do now. And their discussions were very brief, because it was after the budget got passed. The superintendent recommended it, and they implemented it in 4 months, and then he retired. It's an approach. But you know, 8 and 9 aren't the ideals either, but that was what they thought would work for them, and they reduced it to 2 tiers. They also, I think the comment was it had to be budget neutral, so.
But fair enough, they're having problems.
I think there are some concerns, and I think they're having meetings, and the interim superintendent has got a lot of community outreach, but at the moment they're staying the course, they're doing outreach and trying to work it through. And I think the same is happening in Greenwich, that they've encountered problems and they are working to try and see them through. But there's nothing that's a change as big as this that goes smoothly.
Right, and delaying it, we all need to know that even if we delay this, when we implement something, there will still be a few bumps in the road that we're gonna have to work through.
Not everyone's going to be happy. And we can work to educate and bring people to a level of understanding, and we can work with community agencies to help support a transition and understand how we can support that transition with them. But in the end, not everyone is going to be happy, but it doesn't change that this is something that we need to do.
I actually just had a couple comments regarding that were more broader comments, because we've heard often that we feel like this is being driven by a small minority. And while I can't speak for my colleagues around the board table right now, to me, it's not being driven by a small minority. We have multiple medical organizations that I listed already who are driving this for me. We have a petition of over 500 signatures asking us to look at school start time, and a petition from over 60 medical and mental health practitioners in our community and our neighboring communities asking us to look at this. So to me, that's not really a small minority that asked us to start this process and look at this. You know, we've also heard an awful lot about the fact that this one change isn't going to make all the difference, you know, and everything's going to be perfect in the life of adolescents. And I absolutely would agree that the mental and medical health is influenced by multiple factors. However, it's the mission of our public school that this board voted on to do whatever we can to support the health and well-being of our students. Aligning school start times with the medical recommendations is one thing that we can control. There's many other things that we control that we're working on and working towards, regarding homework policy, regarding education, you know, exposure to blue light, electronics in the evening, curriculum throughout the district that works on teaching about healthy habits around sleep, drugs, alcohol, stress, exercise. We have policies in place regarding drugs and alcohol. We have policies in place for ensuring that our students don't go hungry, if their accounts don't have money in them. So there are lots of things that we are doing in this district that support the health and well-being of students. And no, this one thing alone will not do it, and we will continue to identify whatever those issues are as they arise that may be impeding the health and well-being of our students, and we'll address them.
Any other points on Dr. Gordon's proposal? So, well, I'll say something. I do want to thank the district steering committee. We have people that, community members that were asked to come along, spend their time, teachers, administrators, some community members, and they wrestled with all the challenges of change, and they all have lots and lots of different viewpoints. and they worked over the summer and came to the meetings, and I appreciate the work they did. I also want to recognise the work of the board. This process has brought this board into a stronger collaborative relationship, and I would like to thank my board colleagues for the hours that they've devoted to this, to meeting with parents, reading the hundreds of emails, listening to a variety of voices. I know we've all read articles on sleep habits, sleep hygiene, technology use, circadian rhythm, light impacts, position papers from various national and regional bodies. I believe the board members have approached this work diligently and professionally, and I thank you for all the hours you've put in. The range of responses to the survey, and this would be in the comments section, indicated that we had some challenges to a successful implementation, and I think I'd underestimated how strongly the later elementary school parents felt about that. And also a number of parents, elementary school parents were not in favour of moving to a very early start time. And sometimes you don't always manage to reach all the areas of the community. The options that we've advanced have not produced a consensus, and so I do feel that we have work to do, and we need to move this forward. I've been involved in education advocacy for 10 years now, and this is the first time a vote's come to a board where we are going to advance later start times for our adolescent population. It's been talked about on boards for many years, and it's never got to this point where it can be implemented. I thank Dr. Baldwin and the administrators and principals for all the work they do. I do agree with Doug that we really need to reach out strongly to FCAC to say, can we review this and revise this, because this produces a real challenge for those districts who've chosen to change. And I do think that we might want to consider as a board moving towards the state to say this is something that we should consider at the state level. And I'll be happy to work on that with the legislative representatives to take this forward. I'm in favour of the proposal. I also, Dr. Baldwin knows, was disappointed that we couldn't implement anything sooner, but I understand the reasons for this proposal. I'm going to ask if there's anything anyone else wants to say, or are we going to have an action item? We give this a potential action item. Would you like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion. I move that the Board of Education change school start times to align with the research on adolescent sleep and health, effective for the 2019-2020 school year.
I have a second. Jim. If you want to say anything else, this is the chance.
I do. So it meets the criteria in some instances. So I know there's already a second motion on it. But is there an opportunity to put forth maybe a slight change to the motion that we're going to continue to explore?
If you'd like to make an amendment to the motion,
Well, that's what
then we can vote on whether to accept the
Yeah.
amendment to the motion, of course.
I just want to make sure that, and it sounds like we will, but I want to make sure we continue to look at the elementary school start time. That's what we've been discussing. You know, so I'm fine with the 1920, because it makes a lot of sense with the workload and the implementation. But the motion doesn't meet the criteria for all students.
But wouldn't
Well,
that
the-
align with the
So-
research on adolescent sleep and health?
Well, go. I need to think for.
Well, see what, this is what I'm struggling with, because, so we're just saying, we don't have a scenario right now.
No,
This
we're not
scenario
voting
is
on the
gone. There's
scenario.
absolutely no scenario that we're
Correct, so
voting on. We're just today we're going, honestly going back to this drawing board, but we are going back to revisit a better alignment with the research and adolescent sleep patterns.
So let me try and help.
That's, yes.
The motion that was made and seconded was to change school start times to align with the research on adolescent sleep and health effective for the 1920 school year. That's been the motion and the second. And so in my text to you, in my written communication to you, I write that scenario 1 needs to be further reviewed, refined, and evaluated. So that's the basis for review and refinement and evaluation. And as school bus consultants looks at this, and I take all of this feedback to school bus consultants, they may say, Karen, we had one that was called 1E. Let's look at 1E and continue to refine 1E. And so I think we understand what the challenges are. I don't think the motion has to be so detailed. We probably don't want it because we don't have a scenario that we feel comfortable committing to. And so I think the more open-ended approach, because we have understanding and can hold ourselves accountable that they're gonna start the review and the refinement with this, but in so doing, there may be other scenarios that are a better basis for review, and we'll dig in.
Okay, I'm fine.
Well, so let me just, will those scenarios, clearly those scenarios are gonna come back to the board, will they come back to the board for a vote? Or is this moving it completely into operational?
Well, we're saying that at some stage we're going to want reports because I think you want the strategic planning committee and possibly the district steering committee start doing some of the work on implementation. Perhaps at the next, I don't know if the next meeting is too soon, can we have an outline of the time now, the time flow of work? Because if we take this vote and it's going to happen, we can ask for that. I don't want to say in 2 weeks' time if that's not going to.
Well, we're still working on project management and identifying all of that, and so potentially November 13th in a very sort of broad brush, not as detailed as we would want, and we could come back once we have project management in place. Perhaps the end of the month of November or very early December with a more high-level timeline, but it doesn't stop the work with school bus consultants at this juncture.
Well, that's a good point. Do we need to vote on specifically on the start times once we get closer to the whatever approach we're gonna recommend? There's impacts, and there's budget, there's a lot of different impacts on it.
Well, the last time when there was the change to the 4-tier, it was actually part of the budget vote. So, because 9 times out of 10, and tell me if I'm speaking out of turn here, Dr. Baldwin, school start times tend to be built to fit the operations of the units. That's why you're doing it. And some of the changes to fit operations. I think the reason it was done because it was a budget implication, because there had been a budget cut. And so this was the saving measure to have the 4 tiers.
I think there is, in reviewing the policy book, and I didn't think anticipate this was coming out. I think I'm pretty confident that it says school start times is set by the superintendent. As stated policy. I mean, we have a policy meeting Wednesday morning, 8 a.m. So, I mean, we can take a look at that there, but I'm pretty darn confident that there is existing policy that start times is the role of the superintendent.
But the board has been involved up till now, and the board will continue to want to be involved, and the strategic planning committee will want to be involved. So this is a broad outline to say, please move this work forward. That's what I see it as,
Right.
and we're going to implement it in the 1920 school year. I'm sure we can work on this as the months continue, and you can tell us when we need to have a look at this in more depth once we've got something that may meet the parameters of what we discussed.
Right, and certainly the law actually provides the board with the authority to set school start times. There's a legal framework that gives the board discretion in that. So you know, very often as you're referencing, these types of policy decisions get moved into the budget arena and they get connected to a budget request because there's an implication of resource investment to a policy decision, similar to full-day kindergarten. And similar to what happened in this district to go from 3 tiers to 4. It was connected to a budget, so it's a policy consideration connected to budget. So I think it would likely make sense for the board to very publicly vet and take action on it. May also take action on it in the budget as well. But I think it would be practice to have the bell time scenario in front of the board, have the board ask questions, review, and then take action on it.
See, when I read the line with the research on adolescent sleep and health, I see that as limiting your ability to, with the middle schools. Because the research and the information received from all the medical associations tells you they're deeper later. But from what we've heard from our community, that may not be, you know, what our community is really, so it's the wording that I struggle with. Not the moving forward, not the looking deeper, not the 2019-20 year. But if we were to come back with school start times where we do keep the middle schools where they are, at the 7:50 in that 1C scenario, but we were able to go to a 3-tier system and bring those elementary schools so they're not so late, I still don't know that that aligns with the research on adolescents.
Well,
That's
Sharon,
where my
are you
concern.
suggesting then that you amend the motion to approve the superintendent to recommend to change school start times for the 2019-20 school year, to take out to align, to take it out to align with the research on
Or
adolescents?
to more closely align.
Yeah, more
More
closely.
Right,
closely
right.
align, right? I hear what you're saying.
Right,
Maybe
right.
it's some different, yeah, it's a different point.
So, first of all, you have to make a motion for the amendment. So what's
Did you write it down?
Just to more closely align, I think that was what
This is closely aligned.
More closely aligned.
So I make a motion that
So
amend, do I say it?
Make a motion to amend.
Go ahead, you do it.
to make the motion
To
to amend
amend
the original motion.
the original
to
motion
change the words
to read,
to more closely align.
to more closely align with the research in adolescent sleep and health.
Do we have a second to the motion, David? Do we have a discussion on the motion? Is everyone more comfortable with that phrasing?
So everything's the same except to more closely.
Correct.
Okay.
So as to not close it. So then. So then
So
we
do
will
you
vote
feel
on
that
it.
8 o'clock is more closely aligned to 8:30?
Do I feel that 8 o'clock is more closely aligned to 8:30 versus what?
I don't know, you seem to have a problem with 8 o'clock.
It's against the medical recommendations, it's against the research. And if we're telling her to
Now, we
go
just
out
want to
and
make sure
align
it
with
falls
the
within the
research.
parameters of the motion you just made.
What?
Would 8 o'clock fall into the parameters of saying more closely aligned to the research?
It's a good question. Well, because we're working not only with the research and what's best, but we're working with resources, right? We're working with what our community, is that right?
Yeah, I don't know, you're the one that has a problem with this, I'm just asking you.
Well, I'm surprised that you don't have a problem with it at all regarding the research and not a problem with the 4:05 dismissal time for the elementary schools?
Absolutely not. But it's a different issue.
Well, it's not, because that doesn't align with the research.
Yeah, so can we just go back? We have a motion on the table, which is the amendment to the original motion, to change the wording of the original motion to more closely align with the research on adolescent sleep and health effective for 1920. We're going to take the first vote on the amendment. All those in favour of this amendment?
So if we don't like that one,
We vote against.
we vote against it, if we suggest something else, there's maybe another motion to suggest.
Yes.
Yeah, second amendment now.
You'd have to do that first before you.
Yeah.
So instead of more closely, I like the words improve the district's alignment with the research on sleep, on, word adolescent. Improve the district's alignment with the research on sleep and student health effective for the 2019-2020 school year.
Can you say that again?
Sure. That the Board of Education discuss and approve the superintendent's recommendation to change school start times to improve the district's alignment with the research on student sleep and health effective for the 2019-2020 school year.
Okay, do we have a second to this?
I'm just gonna make a minor correction. Because my original motion was I moved that the Board of Education change school start times. I got rid of the discuss and approve section of that phrase. So, anyway,
Yeah, you're right.
just to be perfectly clear.
Okay, so do I have a second for the secondary amendment? Sharon. So, discussion.
We're on Dan's amendment?
Yes. Yes. We can only do this one, then we have to go back to the drawing board.
I think that's.
I like
I
it.
think
Yeah,
that's-
consideration of
Yeah.
all of our children.
Yes, it takes all.
Right.
It does it.
Can you read it back, Rick?
So I've got,
So we're completely clear on what we're voting on.
Right.
Recommendation to change school start times to improve the district's alignment with the research on student sleep and health effective for the 2019-2020 school year.
So you took, I thought you kept adolescent, so you took adolescent.
Cross to adolescent.
Yeah.
Oh,
But
with
students,
students.
because it's all
Okay.
students, all, it's
Okay.
all, not.
All right, I'm sorry, I missed that. Okay.
okay, discussion on this?
I like it.
Okay, so we're voting on the secondary amendment. All those in favour of the secondary amendment? If passed, this is the motion.
And that's done.
Okay, go. You have to vote for your own.
Sorry.
He doesn't like it.
So moved. Okay. Now the work starts.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you very much, Dr. Baldwin. Thank you very much for tonight. Okay, so I'm looking at the wrong agenda, don't do that. Approval of the minutes, oh wow. Does anybody have any corrections for the minutes? Okay, the minutes of the October the 10th meeting.
I move that we approve the minutes for October 10, 2017.
Second, Sharon. Does anybody have any corrections?